What's up, folks? I'm Odd, by the way, and I had a thought, an interesting kind of experiment that I wanted to play around with today, I guess this week for me, but whenever you're seeing this today, where I wanted to figure out what would happen if I took a particularly long amount of time on a project. And in this case, you've probably already seen by the title of the video, it'll be 12 hours. And you might think, well, that's not that much, but I'm not talking about necessarily like a 12-hour period where I'm working on a piece. That happens a lot of the time regardless, or multiple pieces for that matter. But the thing is that when it comes to the actual length of time spent on like the physical drawing of a piece, it takes me maybe somewhere between 3 and 5 hours, depending on the complexity or the size of the piece, right? How many characters are in it, what I'm playing around with. So I thought that it would be interesting to see what would happen if I effectively made it. Let's say my average is about 3 hours. Let's say it took me about 4 times longer than I usually take on my typical workflow to physically work on a piece. And I mean physically. I mean, like, even though there is an aspect of time that is devoted to, like, thinking things through, like, I will stop a piece after working on it for, like, an hour and, like, take the day. And usually when I'm laying in bed, I'll be like, oh, I should work on this, I should work on this. And that stuff is important to the process. But I am talking about the actual physical meat of the drawing, which is a lot more difficult. And initially I considered doing 24 hours, but I figured that I would start with something a little bit shorter first because this is already like 4 times the length of my usual drawing process, as I've already said. So maybe after I do this, I will revisit it in a little while afterward. Especially because if I did work consistently at my usual average for 3 hours a day, and it may vary, it can vary between 3, 4, 5. It would take me 4 days to finish a 12-hour piece, but it would take me 8 days to finish a 24-hour piece. So you see my struggle. And obviously I would want to, make that number a little bit lower if I possibly could. And based off of that notion, it would be a big piece. It would be huge. And so would this one, possibly. But at least this one feels more doable. It's less than 2 work days of work. It also makes me curious about my capability of slowing myself down and actually really getting into the weeds of the details, which I do enjoy doing. I am almost a little bit worried that the perfectionist side of me will kind of come out in force for this piece because it's taking so long, and there'll be kind of like a sunk cost situation going into it. So I'll have to avoid that and make sure that it doesn't encroach over the 12 hours, which, I mean, I doubt it would, but I don't know. I don't know this reality where I'm working on a piece physically for 12 hours. So yes, I have my blank canvas up, obviously, digitally, and my timer. And I made sure that this will maintain its time when it's closed, which was important to me because I'm sure that I'll be opening and closing it at the regular. When I sit down to start physically drawing, I will have this on, hopefully. And if not, like, my backup is obviously the fact that I'll be recording and I can check through the files, but I would rather not have to do that. But that is a possibility. That is my backup in case I forget, because I very well could forget. Interested to see what this challenge will bring out of me, if I will struggle with trying to find something to do within the 12 hours that I can work on. This will probably be a relatively big piece. In fact, it probably will be. Maybe I should make the canvas bigger. My canvas is already pretty big as it is. My preset for my basic canvas is 3000 by 3000 pixels, in case you were wondering. 300 dpi. And that is what I usually work at, but I might want to make it bigger. Maybe 3 by 5000? Maybe. And yeah, I'm thinking so far that I might use my 2 characters, Alex and Sybil, who I've done at least one big piece for, technically two. And they're also human characters, which is a struggle for me, and the extra amount of time will probably be appreciated here. And I can actually get into the posing and the scene of it all and stuff like that. I might actually even write out what I want to do first, and that probably won't even be included in the physical drawing process, so that will just be its own thing. But that's fine. This is probably going to be a big piece that will take a matter of days, probably longer than the like 4 days that I had initially thought. But at that, I think that I will throw this over to my process. Hope that you're excited to join me, and I will see y'all when we actually get to the drawing. Instead of immediately starting with the drawing, I decided to write down what exactly I wanted out of this piece. And this wasn't even part of the time drawing, given I wanted to time, well, the physical drawing of it all. I should try to write out what I want for my illustrations more, though. I stuck with the idea that I had to use my pre-existing OCs, Alexis and Sybil. My ultimate plan was to take some inspiration from medieval illuminated manuscripts, which have a lot of little details and symbology to them. I even put some picture references in my Word document to have everything all neatly together. I knew I wanted my girls, dancing in some fashion but not quite touching in the exact moment captured, with some of the symbolism I already have for their story. A wolf and a rabbit flank the opposite corners, as well as some sunflowers and violets. The sketch phase was way longer than I initially thought it would be. I did play around with trying to thumbnail a bit, but I did move on pretty quickly to the actual sketch. I think a major event was the poses, which I did try to look up some reference for, which also stopped the timer. It's interesting having a challenge like this that doesn't really have a maximum but a minimum, and that is solely for drawing. I wasn't stopping the timer to necessarily extend my time, but to make sure the time was just all drawing and not padded by the, if necessary, in-between stuff. In a way, I almost felt rushed at first. There is also this weird degree of embarrassment I had, like, did it really take me this long to do this? Am I wasting time? Eventually I did just kind of fall into it, though. I've been writing something for these two on and off that isn't quite as fleshed out as I'd like it to be yet, but basically, Alex is a knight who has been devoted to her kingdom since she was a child, and Sybil is, as her name pretty clearly alludes to, a seer. Both of them actually have names relevant to what they do, because Alexis also means defender. It's both from the limits of my capabilities to name my characters, and kind of shows where they stand lore-wise, because both struggle with the nature of being raised as effectively tools to their kingdom. The sunflowers are for devotion, but also to do with the kingdom itself, which I have at least for now been calling Helianthus for sunflowers. There's a nod of sun worship to it, but also the king's name is Sol, so you may already be grasping the god complex at play here. I actually had a pre-existing drawing I did of a concept for the kingdom's flag, which I also wound up including here. You ever write something, then describe a visual before you're like, wait, how would that actually work? And suddenly you're designing the kingdom's iconography? No, just me? Actually, that is part of the reason that I started drawing altogether. I have a pretty vibrant imagination, and I wanted to be able to express the visuals I had in mind. I didn't really trust anyone else to be able to do it justice when I was younger. I was burned a lot by bad book adaptations. I was a very prolific writer as a kid. I still am, but I'm definitely not as devoted. Like, I was 100% certain I would just be a writer when I grew up. I still feel like I'd consider myself a storycraft forward kind of person, but I have definitely taken quite a detour into developing my visual art skills. I also just like making things in general, expressing myself. Not to turn this into a self reflection, but I mean, hey, we're gonna be here a while, and these types of things come up when you're drawing for 12 hours. Anyway, the flag is supposed to resemble both the sun and a sunflower at once. As for the other elements pictured, the violets are a pretty common queer, probably specifically sapphic symbol, and they also represent a secret love or things that can't be said out loud in floriography, thus the kind of obvious tie back into same-sex couples. I considered gardenia, which seems to have a similar meaning, but it felt like that kind of threw off what was an otherwise pretty symmetrical layout to the flowers. And of course I had to add in some animals. Do you know how hard it is as a furry to draw animals as symbolism over actual characters? I think I got away with a bit of both here because the animals do represent the girls too. These are basically updated versions of the girls' personas, effectively. You'll see where I drew them initially in a little burst when I get to coloring them. Alex is a leucidic, or at least light-colored wolf, and Sybil is a brown and tan hare. The obvious symbolism of the duality is there in the wolf and the rabbit, but the two animals are more to do with how the girls view themselves over any actual representation of who they are. Alex has the title of the wolf in her kingdom, but the wolf we see here isn't really wild. It's chained and emaciated, choked by a collar to stand. It looks intimidating, but it's probably really in pain. The rabbit is a sacrifice, with the back of its neck cut open, but its position could be seen as laying splayed out or running away. Sybil, being a seer, has knowledge of how she's going to die, and she believes it to be the right path for the kingdom when the story begins and these two cross paths. I've drawn her with red eyes up to this point, really, which I kept on the rabbit, but honestly it started to feel a little too on the nose for her character design and a bit too fantastical, especially as I've decided some things about how her abilities manifest. So I've decided the red still comes into play, but specifically when she's scrying, which isn't in this situation. Her eyes, as they are normally, are just a deep brown, maybe leaning toward an almost mauvey red color, but overall brown. Sybil's whole outfit actually includes a veil that covers her face, but I wanted to have both of their actual faces visible while still in most of the garb for their roles. I mean, Alex also has a helmet that covers her face as well. She is still obviously carrying it. It's her identity and her burden. And as I added in the color, I made Sybil's cloak only a little bit darker than the tapestries to make her sort of blend into the scenery. Meanwhile, Alex definitely feels out of place among all the warm tones with her cool armor color scheme, and her overall blue color scheme is a big part of her character, even though she has that red hair. I think the whole thing I'd like to explore here is that feeling of being a tool, something less than, and whether or not two people, who despite their very different roles are very similar, could find their way to something resembling human, or at least their own, together. This is one of my more ridiculously self-indulgent stories, and it's so much fun to work on because of that, honestly. When it comes to the piece itself and the time I took on it, this kind of started to feel like that expression that's like the work increases to meet the time or something like that. There's quite a bit of detail going on here, obviously, but not as much as I thought there would be. And as I reached the end, I felt like there were still things I could do. Maybe I just focused too much on very particular details. Funnily enough, even after I ran up the 12 hours, I actually went back to just to slightly darken the background behind the banners. It felt just a little incomplete there, and it wasn't really important for anything but depth. While in some areas I definitely went in more manually to fix things, it is interesting that I was still kind of using a lot of my usual methods to do things digitally. I actually kind of like that it isn't too overly rendered or detailed, though I'm surprised I didn't wind up having to. I even at least tried to make it so any blips of me searching for references, taking a bathroom break, or changing the podcast episode I was on weren't included in the time by pausing the timer, as I mentioned before. And any times that I might have slipped up were probably leveled out by the number of times I also forgot to unpause it when I got back to drawing. I do think that illuminations tend to be a bit less polished looking than this, even if they're complex. The humans tend to have a bit more of a simplistic look in most of them. But that was mainly just my jumping off point, and the amount of time did a lot for a bit more rendering than that. I wound up calling it at about 12 hours and 4 minutes, leaving the extra few minutes to add any of my finishing touches, like softening the lines, adding noise and textures, all that. And even after that was when I wound up going in to darken the background off camera. But again, I didn't have the timer up for that. It only took a few seconds, so my official time for this piece is 12 hours, 4 minutes, and 36 seconds, possibly somewhere closer to 40 to account for the seconds I didn't add. Nearing the end here, and I am really proud of this. I think it feels very whimsical, and it's fun to add the little bits and pieces of symbolism for my characters' stories into one piece. What did I learn here? I think mostly the prospect that I can work on and finish a big piece like this. Honestly, I kind of liked it. There is something to the nature of having a project to work on daily and come back to. I've noticed it with a few daily challenges I've done, but a lot of those have the added stress of coming up with a new concept daily, usually within a reasonable amount of time, and posting it. This was something closer to a traditional project that allowed me to just kind of sink into the process. I probably could do a 24-hour piece if I wanted to, though probably not immediately after this one. I didn't let myself get too fatigued, but my wrist was definitely feeling it. I actually even took a whole day between the last stages of this to rest, which isn't something that I usually wind up doing. I also wound up having to stop for a minute because OBS said I didn't have enough disk space, so a little last minute spring cleaning for this digitally. Let me know what you think though. And when I was thinking of this, I did get curious about something. If you're an artist, particularly a digital artist, or at least you've used the medium, how long do you take to make what you'd consider a full regular piece? I think I mentioned at the head of this, but my range is usually 3 to 5 hours. Traditional mediums obviously kind of lend themselves to a lengthier process, but digital can definitely feel very speedy with the number of tools you have at your disposal. Along with that, you can let me know what other art challenges you might like to see me do in the future. The 24-hour drawing is definitely in my back pocket, so don't worry about that. At that, though, I will leave this here, and I will see y'all next time.